Greetings! In today's video, I'll be taking a look at this little palette from Woomer. This is my first time testing out paints from Woomer. I had never heard of this company before, but they kindly offered to send me this little palette to try out, and it seems to be a really interesting design, so I'm eager to take a look at that. It came, with this wrapper, so let's just take a look at this. The wrapper says Watercolor paint set, 9 colors, 1 color chart, built-in palette. You have a drawing of the layout. The company has a little cat face for a logo, so and then on the back you have important information, the notice, and also, interestingly, pigment information. Now, to my knowledge and experience, this is the first time I see this info so easily available for a similar product, and I really like it. I like that it's just there on the paper, nothing in there. So it is a little travel palette made mainly of plastic. This doubles up as a water cup, and then the palette itself. So you have a corner here that you can open it. The color chart is little cat faces. Aw, that's really cute. And then you have 2 mixing trays that fold out like this. The set comes with a very generous 9 color pans. Like, these are really big. This is an empty half pan, just for comparison. These are at least as big as half pans. I like it. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's really quite well designed. I like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare a drawing, a swatch card. I'm going to be painting the swatch card that came with the set too. And then I'll be able to share information and my thoughts and impressions on this palette. So see ya in a bit. And I'm back. We are going to take a look at the little palette and what I did with it. But first, the palette. So I had a really fun time with this palette. I think it's a really interesting design. The only part of the palette that was a bit of a confusing element for me was this cup, because I'm not entirely sure what you're supposed to clip it to. You see, it has these plastic clips, and maybe it's user error, maybe it's my fault, but I couldn't find something to clip it to, because if the clips were a bit lower, you could clip it like here so it's more steady, but the clips are really high up, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to clip this to. And I don't really think I could clip it to my sketchbook either, because it's not the right angle. So not sure about that, but maybe the goal of the clips is just to attach the whole palette to your set. I don't know, but you don't really need to use this as a water vessel to be able to use this set, so. And this is how my palette looks at the moment. As you can see, I have indeed painted with it. My thoughts and impressions. I had a really fun time painting with this palette. I will show you what I did, but I felt like it was a really good selection of 9 colors. You get a bit of everything. You have a nice yellow that is kind of neutral. The orange is nice, then a red, a magenta, so that's good. You get 2 blues, one that is possibly a bit more yellow than the other, but it's not a cool blue all that much, but it is somewhat cooler than the ultramarine, which is super nice and deep, and then the phthalo green and the Payne's gray. So I think it was a really good selection. You have this Payne's gray that is kind of a neutral color that you can use for mixes, and then with all of these you can really get to a lot of different colors through mixing. Now, I mentioned that the packaging comes with color info. I was a bit confused about the Payne's Gray because it says that it only has PG7 and PB15. And if you've seen PG7 and PB15, there's not really a way to mix these two to get a color like this that is almost black. So I wrote to my contact at Woomer and they told me that they will inquire about it. And yeah, they didn't include the PBK7 pigment on the wrapper. That's also in the mix. So there is a black pigment in this mix, which makes a whole lot more sense. And then there's not a lot more to say about the pigments, really. They all look fairly consistent with what's written on the wrapper. Perhaps this one, the PY13, is possibly not the most light fast yellow, but that's the only one that really jumps up to me. Also, the lilac purple is really interesting. I don't know if it's my swatch, but it kind of has a bit of a duotone double color effect. That's not something I've seen a lot with these particular pigments, but I think it looks really pretty, so I'm not gonna argue with it. All right, so considering that this set has 9 colors, the first thing that I decided I wanted to do is a mixing chart. Now, if you know me, you know that I very rarely do mixing charts because they are super time consuming. But I felt like in this case, it wouldn't be a waste of time to look into it a bit more. And I took the time to set this up and to paint it so that we would get perhaps a better feel for the versatility of this palette. The colors that are framed in black, these are the colors of the palette. And then if you go to any other rectangle, it's the mix of the two colors that align with it. And I did these colors more intense, and then I did a really pale wash for these colors. And overall, I think it's a fairly nice palette. Taking a quick look at this mixing chart, the only mix that feels like is not all that present to me is the warm brown. You could probably mix a warm brown from mixing 3 colors or tuning up those mixes, but if you look at this, you get a good selection of like muted greens, you have nice oranges here, lots of purples, even here at the bottom, greens that lean more towards the blue. And then here you have like a bunch of neutrals and a really nice dark green here, but you don't get that many like warm brown. It would be easy to mix, it's just not that present on a first level of mixing with these colors. I think we get a lot of really pretty colors going with this selection of colors. I'm quite impressed, to be honest. I think this is a very versatile selection of color. I can see myself painting with these colors really effortlessly, so I think that's really cool. There's a few colors that have a bit of a texture to them. Not fully sure why, but this here, the Quin Rose and the yellow, they have a bit of a texture. And then this one, the lilac, still has this lovely separation going. So all the colors that are mixed from this one kind of keep that aspect of it. The cobalt blue is meant to be made with real cobalt blue pigment, PB28, so that also explains the granulation you get here. Most of the colors are really nice and smooth and even, and they're also quite vibrant. There is one test that's always interesting to do with any kind of paint palette is to put them under UV light. It helps to see if some paints have had a fluorescent dye included in the mix, or sometimes it's just optical brighteners. So it's not something that adds a color to it, but it will make the color more vibrant. These elements, the neon dyes and the optical brighteners, they tend to fade faster than just the pigment. So it's something to keep in mind if you plan on using these paints. It's really hard to see because I have all my lights on, and even when I close my lights, the camera tends to compensate for it, but perhaps we can kind of see just a little bit. But the lilac purple has a bit of a reaction to the UV light, so there's probably some sort of dye or optical brightener in there. It would also explain this granulation effect. It's something that I've seen happen a lot with neon colors mixed in with other pigments. Sometimes you get kind of a really interesting double color effect. But all the other colors, they didn't react. So that would be the only one. If you are really, really adamant about light fastness being the most important feature of your paints, perhaps it would be best not to use this lilac purple in your paintings. So you can really easily mix nice purples from the quinacridone rose and the 2 blues you get in the set. So you have all of these here that are really nice. They're really pretty. There's definitely a way to mix a similar hue to this one with these. I didn't just do a mixing chart, I also did a little painting. So this is my little painting, and I always like to repaint bigger swatches in my sketchbook. Really, I had a super fun time painting with these. I really tried to take an approach of painting with the supplies I would have if I painted outside of my studio. So I used travel brushes. You could also use a water brush, and I think it turned out fine. I really don't have any issue with how this turned out. I was able to use the cobalt blue in the sky for this texture that I think is quite fun. The colors, they mixed well, they layered well. I really didn't have any issue with that. I was able to use my usual dry brushing techniques for texture and create some effect, and really no odd behaviors from these paints. It worked out perfectly well. I can definitely see how useful these would be to paint outside. And I think this palette is really serviceable. The pans are big. These are big pancakes. And I feel like even if I ran out, or if say you wanted to remove this color because you are really that worried about light fastness, well, you could easily remove it from the tray and then put a color in there that you want. Like, this set has a lot of potential for being reused and modified to really match what you want from a little paint set. And it's really small. It is really, really small. Even with this plastic case on, let's say you carry like this and you know, the kind of standard unofficial rule of choosing a sketchbook, but technically you should always match your sketchbook with the size of your paint set and brush. So perhaps for these, if I was to really go paint outside, I would try to find a slightly smaller sketchbook. I think these could work out well. Very similar in size, or even these really tiny ones, also be a good fit for the size of this palette. You could also keep the swatch separately and use this lid as an extra mixing area. The only thing to be careful about when painting outside is if you have a lot of a little puddle of paint, just be mindful of that before closing up your set because it's a really good recipe to end up with a big mess. So that's perhaps the only thing to really be mindful of. Overall, this is such a nice compact set. I feel like this case, even if you end up not using it for water, it can be really useful to prevent dust from getting in the palette. Also, I used it to prop up my brushes. Let's say I was putting my brush down for a second, I would just put it in this so the wet tip would not put water elsewhere. You could just put water in it and leave it like that, but I would be scared of tipping it over. It's not all that stable and it's a shape that is really easy to tip over. So that would be something that scares me enough that I wouldn't risk it. My overall take on this palette is that I really liked it. I can see myself using it again. I love the colors. I love this weird lilac purple that separates and creates some really interesting effect. This is something that I would have no issue at all using in my sketchbook. I think it adds a lot to a painting to have this sort of randomized effect going on. And a personal thing, but of course, I particularly enjoyed that they have cat themed elements, or I mean, what I hope is a cat. Yeah, it definitely looks like a little cat making a face. So it's silly, but it's always an extra point with me when, you know, things really go along my interests. They get another extra point for including pigment info, even if it was not complete with the missing pigment and perhaps the missing info that the lilac purple has something extra going on. But this is definitely more info than we get usually with, you know, little convenience travel kits that are affordable and accessible and whatnot. So I'm really happy with this. I think this is great, and I would love it if all the companies could include pigment info. I would recommend this set. I think it's really nice. I think it's fun. I think the little palette has a lot of potential and the paints are good. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you had a fun time. I sure did. And thank you so much, Woomer, for sending me this little palette. I had a really fun time painting with it, and I'm looking forward to painting with it some more. So, yep, see you guys in the next one, and in the meantime, take care. Bye-bye.